How to reduce personal expenses during an economic downturn. An economic downturn doesn't usually begin with panic. It begins quietly, with smaller paychecks, higher prices, and decisions that suddenly feel heavier than they used to. When the economy slows, the most important financial changes happen at the household level, not on Wall Street. And the way individuals adjust their spending often determines how resilient they are during periods of uncertainty. Most people assume that reducing expenses means drastic sacrifices. In reality, economic slowdowns reveal patterns in spending that often go unnoticed during growth periods. Understanding those patterns is the first step toward making informed, deliberate financial adjustments. And that understanding begins right now. Economic downturns affect households unevenly, but they share one common characteristic: uncertainty. During these periods, income growth slows, job security becomes less predictable, and inflation often reshapes purchasing power. As a result, personal expense management becomes less about optimization and more about stability. In the United States, consumer spending accounts for a majority of economic activity. This means household decisions don't just reflect the economy, they actively influence it. When millions of individuals adjust their expenses, those changes ripple outward, shaping demand, employment, and overall economic recovery timelines. This video explains how expense reduction works during downturns from an economic perspective. Not as advice, but as an educational framework, showing the systems, behaviors, and trade-offs that commonly emerge when households adapt to slower economic conditions. How personal expenses function in a downturn. During economic expansions, personal spending tends to be habitual. Expenses repeat monthly with little scrutiny. In downturns, however, spending behavior becomes more intentional. Households begin categorizing expenses not by routine, but by necessity, flexibility, and long-term impact. Economists typically describe expenses in three broad categories: fixed, variable, and discretionary. Fixed expenses include housing and insurance. Variable expenses include utilities and food. Discretionary expenses include entertainment, subscriptions, and non-essential purchases. During downturns, households focus primarily on the last category first. What's often overlooked is that expense reduction isn't about elimination. It's about prioritization. The goal becomes aligning spending with stability rather than lifestyle expansion. This shift in mindset marks a fundamental behavioral change that often persists even after economic conditions improve. Key mechanisms and systems involved. One of the most powerful expense control mechanisms during downturns is substitution. When prices rise or income growth slows, consumers naturally substitute higher-cost goods and services with lower-cost alternatives. This behavior is not emotional. It is structural. Another mechanism is delay. Large purchases such as vehicles, home upgrades, or electronics are often postponed. Delayed spending reduces immediate financial pressure while preserving future optionality, a concept widely studied in behavioral economics. Households also engage in renegotiation. This includes reassessing service plans, insurance structures, and recurring contracts. From an economic standpoint, renegotiation reflects increased price sensitivity, a hallmark of downturn behavior. Real-world implications for the U.S. economy. When millions of households reduce discretionary spending simultaneously, entire industries feel the impact. Retail, hospitality, travel, and entertainment sectors often experience demand contraction first. This is why these sectors are considered economically sensitive. At the same time, essential goods and services tend to remain stable. Food, utilities, healthcare, and housing show lower volatility. This uneven adjustment helps explain why downturns don't affect all businesses or workers equally. What's rarely discussed is how these personal expense adjustments quietly reshape the recovery phase, and why the choices made during downturns often define financial outcomes long after conditions improve. Common misconceptions. A common misconception is that reducing expenses automatically lowers quality of life. Economic data shows that many households report minimal satisfaction changes after adjusting discretionary spending, particularly when changes are planned rather than forced. Another misconception is that expense reduction is temporary. In reality, downturn-induced habits often persist. Historical data shows that households frequently maintain lower spending baselines even during recoveries.